Hello, beautiful visionaries. This is Lorna Liana, host of Entheo Nation at the World Ayahuasca Conference in beautiful Girona, Spain. I am here today with Anja, who is a psychotherapist. Can you share with us a little bit about the work that you do?
Yes, hello. I'm a clinical psychologist trained in clinical psychology and humanistic psychology and Gestalt. And I've been working from traditional healers, learning the work with ayahuasca for over 20 years and working in this bridging in between traditional medicine and clinical psychology, how to best complement each other in this way. And did some research on ayahuasca for the treatment of mental health challenges and work also as clinical psychologist, helping people to integrate difficult experiences or supporting them with beneficial experience for them to get more out of them.
So, with the globalization of ayahuasca, there are more and more people coming out facilitating ayahuasca ceremonies, and the question of whether or not that person's qualified might be a big question. So, I'm curious to know, because no one ever seems to talk about what it's actually like if somebody gets messed up from an ayahuasca ceremony or a psychedelic ceremony of a different kind. What does messed up look like, and how do you put that person back together?
It's actually very good that you bring up this topic because we're all speaking about the therapeutic potential of ayahuasca, which it certainly has an appropriate context. But as it's just a tool, the tool can be beneficial and can be harmful depending who uses it and with which intention and with which qualification. So it's a very delicate tool because it goes like really in the depths of your mind, of your soul, and of your whole being. So unfortunately, in our clinical practice in Mexico, we see more and more people coming to seek out help because they participated in an ayahuasca ceremony with somebody who's not really qualified to guide this work, and then it manifests in people who may not be able to sleep for many days because they are traumatized. They have experienced a really traumatic impact on the psyche. It looks very similar as a post-traumatic stress disorder. So not being able to sleep, huge level of anxiety, depression, even suicidal thoughts. Some people are so desperate, the only way to they consider getting out of the situation is wanting to take their life. So it can be really serious.
And so, might some of these people already have issues before going into the ceremony, or have you seen cases where somebody was totally fine, normal, functioning human being, and then they were messed up in the ceremony, and now they're just completely, not capable of functioning in their day-to-day life?
Well, actually, I want to underline if a guide is really qualified to accompany such an experience, people don't get messed up because there is enough preparation before. They know which dose to give the people, they know how to contain them, and then they give them the right support to integrate them. For me, those are the very important elements. And also they have the ethical integrity not to abuse somebody during or right after the ceremony, because those could be an issue, like sexual abuse during or shortly after a ceremony can mess up a person who has not had a mental health issue before. Mm-hmm. That would be one of those reasons. Others could be a pre-existing trauma. Oftentimes they're childhood trauma because they're very deep burden in the psyche. So people might touch upon such a trauma, and if this is not contained, if this is not accompanied in the right way, there can be an overwhelming emotion that can lead to re-traumatization.
I see.
So other people might have psychotic predisposition or a bipolar predisposition that was not properly screened for. So they received 2 huge doses of medicine, which was not medicinal for them. There's different reasons.
So when you bring up screening, that makes me think of a type of ceremony and container that's run by a Western facilitator. So the integration, the pre-screening, the preparation, the post-ceremony integration. These are things that I see were brought in by the non-indigenous facilitators, because I rarely ever see many of the indigenous or the mestizo curanderos really kind of doing that type of thing.
They have their type of screening. I can actually tell you some stories of indigenous curanderi taking the pulse or looking into the eyes of a Westerner and saying, I won't give you ayahuasca, it won't be good for you. And this person then went to seek out a charlatan who would give him the ayahuasca, because he had traveled all the way from Mexico down to the Amazon to seek out the medicine. He was frustrated that this curandera won't give him ayahuasca. And then he ended up in a psychiatric ward because of a psychotic breakthrough. Yeah.
So I have never been screened by a mestizo curandero or indigenous page or shaman. They've just, served me, and just often I will hear that, the medicine pretty much heals everything. So there's this inherent trust in the healing ability of the medicine, regardless of what your background might be. So so that brings up the question of qualification. So what defines qualification? I mean, if we have, let's say, an indigenous page, an indigenous healer, shaman, who has perhaps been learning the plants, since they were young, maybe they're, several generations of ayahuasqueros, and they have a lot of the traditional lineage behind them and the traditional training behind them. Would they be qualified to be serving this medicine and to be receiving as patients people from Western industrialized countries that have Western industrialized problems?
I do think that an authentic traditional healer is qualified, because the essence of the human psyche is not so different. However, Westerners might benefit from an additional integration with a Western-trained psychotherapist, just to translate some of their experience into the Western context. Like, I've observed a lot from working with traditional healers that they measure very carefully the dose. They know that people have different sensitivities to the plants. They won't serve everybody the same dosage. So
I have noticed that too.
Some people would just benefit from a small dose. This is what they're able to contain, and others need a huge dose in order to go in. So a well-trained practitioner knows how much to give and how to accompany the person into those inner spaces and how to bring them back. And so,
how would a seeker from a non-Amazonian country be able to determine whether the shaman, curandero that they will be receiving ayahuasca from is indeed qualified? Because I noticed that rarely ever does anybody ask screening questions of the shaman. It almost kind of feels disrespectful in a certain way, or maybe there's a language barrier. So how would a person know and determine whether the person's a real thing or a charlatan, even if they're wearing feathers and a necklace of jaguar teeth?
Well, that's a tricky question, especially now with the commercialization of ayahuasca. Best thing is to ask the local tribe, the local communities, because they know their healers. They know who's a true healer, and they know who's a charlatan. Yeah. And then ask the community of really experienced people, who would they recommend?
And that thing can be a bit tricky because with the globalization of ayahuasca, some of the shamans that are traveling around in North America, in Europe, are really the people that speak maybe the best Spanish or the best English or play the best guitar, but they're not necessarily the people with the deepest plant medicine knowledge because those people are in the forest.
That's very true.
So if a person ends up messed up in their ceremony, then how do you put that person back together as a psychotherapist?
Okay, there's different aspects to this work. One very important aspect is trauma therapy, and in one way, really like helping people to contain their emotion, like activate their resources to deal with those undigested emotions that have come up. Sometimes they need some body work because you cannot all work it on the mind. Sometimes it's really like about releasing, like body-oriented release techniques for trauma might be helpful. Grounding, accompaniment. People might be so dissociated that they need several days of accompaniment, like the way the spiritual emergencies work through by the spiritual emergency network. So they would benefit from somebody who could just be present with them and accompany them without harming themselves, right? Because sometimes a process like this could last several days. So there could be sometimes it's necessary to give a sleep medication because if people go too long in this issue of not being able to sleep, their dissociation could become worse.
So where do you find a specialist that can help somebody who has been messed up by a psychedelic ceremony or retreat? Because it's really hard to look in the phone book or look online for your mainstream psychotherapist and say, hey, I did this really strong psychedelic and I need help. So where can somebody find a therapist who is familiar with spiritual emergence crises that might come from a psychedelic experience?
So I think the spiritual emergency network might provide a good resource. ICEERS also on their webpage, they have some resources for integration. And I think they're setting up international networks of practitioners with both experience in ayahuasca and psychotherapy. And it's just like reaching out to people who have had experience with a good psychotherapist, a sensitive psychotherapist. I think they don't need to be specialists in ayahuasca, but maybe being able to work more in a psychotherapy form that is not only mind-oriented, but is experiential. Like in this way, somebody who's more humanistic and experiential trained, or trained in transpersonal psychotherapy.
Thank you so much. How can the audience best stay in touch with you, Anja?
During email.
What is your email?
Nierika@gmx.net.
That's
Thank you.
NIERIKA@gmx.net.
.net.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.